Before I begin, um, when I'm speaking on behalf of Black people's experiences in the United States, which is what I mostly talk about, I like to do a call to ancestors. I hear the voices of centuries past, singing in chorus a language my tongue will never speak, but I feel it deep in my bones when Black blood wets the earth, and another opens their mouth, from which crawls the parts of revolution, words for some, movements for others, but all demanding dignity. Ashe. My name is Jawanza James Williams. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm profoundly honored to be in this space and to be with these two on this panel, and also this beautiful music that we just heard that really, really spoke to my spirit. And let me actually set my timer because I have exactly 13, 14 minutes, and I don't want to overdo it. So first, I would like to thank the Communist Party of the USA, People's World, and of course, the people in this space. I would also like to thank the Vocal New York members who are here. If you could raise your hands. Like these folks are building political power, and they also support me in ways that I hope that they know I profoundly, profoundly appreciate, and I do not take for granted. Who am I? Again, my name is Jawanza, and right now I'm currently employed at Vocal New York as a managing director of organizing. And Vocal New York is a statewide grassroots membership organization building power to end AIDS, homelessness, mass incarceration, and the drug war, and to build an economy and democracy that works for the communities that we organize. We do that work through community-based organizing, where we organize 4 issue-based unions: a homelessness union, a positive leaders union made up of people who live with HIV, a users union made up of people who are active and former drug users, and a civil rights union made up of people who are formerly incarcerated or police or justice impacted. And those are the people that sort of help guide the organization politically on the issue-based campaigns we might work on and help us generate the kind of people power that we need to build to advance the kinds of social or political goals that we may have through city and state policy. And you should be aware that we're also about to launch at some point a Vocal US, a national formation, following the launch of Vocal Kentucky, another statewide organization of the same mission, and now Vocal Texas. And there is an affiliate called Vocal Washington operating in Seattle. I wanted to spend, I should also mention that I'm a member of the CPUSA, a member of DSA, a member of Black Alliance for Peace, board member of Black Youth Project 100, and I'm a PhD student in the political science department at the CUNY Graduate Center, focusing on American politics and public policy. What I mostly wanted, first of all, I also have to thank the organizers of this event, Kay and Ben and all the folks who are really doing the work to make sure that we are recentering the experiences of Black people in these states and across the world who have organized for communist struggle for decades and decades. I want to recommend a book to everybody if you haven't seen it. It's about, I think it's Organized Power Win, maybe. It's by Dr. CBS about Black women. Oh, sweet. Can you read the title, Khadijah? Organized Fight Win, about the writings of Black communist women and their contributions to the party, to the movements. It's a really fascinating collection of documents that I really recommend everybody takes a look at. I wanted to start my part of the conversation, not so much about housing. I do want to talk a bit about homelessness in particular, but I want to talk about another structural phenomena that has affected this country for over almost 200 years, which is the war on drugs. You know, folks think that the war on drugs started in 1971, but that's the official launch of the drug war. And I think that there's this idea that affects leftist movements, that affects Black people in particular in this country, including those of us on the left who are fighting for revolutionary futures. And somehow it's incompatible that Black people do use drugs. And not all drug use is problematic drug use. And we use drugs for pleasure. And Black people, like a lot of people, in particular working class people, poor people, there's this narrative that somehow all drug use, all substance use, all mind-altering substance use is somehow problematic. All of it is a product of the white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal, imperialist violence of our world of the last 300, 400 years, 500 years. But I have serious contention with that because I think that the future that we're building as socialists, as communists, as people working to transform the world, is a world where people are free and self-determined. And how one decides to self-determine their degree of consciousness is up to them. I think it's up to us as a beloved society to create the context and conditions for people to be able to do so in a way that preserves and advances their life. So I keep realizing that it's such a huge confusion among people that I decide to talk about it in spaces like these to help really spread the message of what I'm saying. So I wrote a brief research document that I call An Analysis of the Racist Origins of U.S. Drug Policy and Contemporary Consequences, Dismantling the War on Drugs and Advancing Harm Reduction Practices. I'm not going to read the whole thing, just a couple of excerpts just to give you a sense of what I'm describing. And writing is, more clear. Since the late 1800s, the United States government implemented drug policy through explicitly racialized rationale, resulting in disproportionate enforcement and collateral consequences for communities of color, in particular low-income Black communities. Federal legislation like 1909's Anti-Opium Act, 1914's Harrison Tax Act, the prohibition of alcohol in 1917, all marked the beginning of the war on drugs. Later officially launched by President Richard Nixon in 1971. The presidencies following Nixon have each continued and expanded the scope and complexity of punitive drug policy. Both Republican and Democratic administrations often facilitated through racialized politics. Yielding demonstrably disproportionate health and legal consequences for communities of color. These drug policies paved a path of criminalization, mass incarceration, and contributed to the contemporary overdose crisis. The dominant political discourse in the United States continues to depend on racialized stigmatization of people who use drugs, often scapegoating drug use and low-level sales of illegal substances on Black, brown, low-income immigrant communities, while ignoring or dismissing the evidence-based objections to punitive drug policy. So in this paper, I trace the racialized foundation of drug policy in the United States and its contemporary consequences, especially among racialized communities. So just briefly, I'll go over the early history of drug prohibition in the United States and racialized rationality. The use of mind-altering substances in the United States has a history of being used for medicinal, recreational, and ceremonial purposes. The criminal legal system's modern infrastructure of prosecution and enforcement is largely credited to the prohibition and regulation of, namely alcohol, opium, cocaine, and marijuana or cannabis. In the case of opium, a substance heavily associated with Chinese immigrants in the late 1800s, the United States and Chinese governments worked together to curb opium distribution through a treaty concluded in 1880, later ratified by the U.S. President Garfield in 1881, established that, quote, the governments of China and the United States mutually agree and undertake that Chinese subjects shall not be permitted to import opium into any of the open ports, respectively. So that's in the US and in mainland China. And I'm losing my spot. So concern about opium addiction and associated social ills had already been subjected to state and local legislation. In 1875, the city of San Francisco issued an ordinance banning opium dens, and that's in quotes, which, and they were facilities organized or operated by recent Chinese immigrants in the US. The ordinance specifically targeted establishments that were serving white men and women. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that these opium dens were criminalized in San Francisco in the 1800s because of the phobia that white Americans were subject to, problems associated to opium use. And basically, I don't want to continue reading too much of this. I'm going to hop to some of the current period. So I'm just trying to point out that there are punitive racialized drug policies that happened 100 years before 1971. That's important for us to recognize. And also, when you think about the working class experiences and racialized violence, when it comes to Chinese Americans, to African Americans, et cetera, and immigration, it's very important that we don't leave out the fact that drug policy has been a vehicle to advance racist ideas. In fact, I have in this article, I have two clips from one from a New York Times front page from February 8th, 1914. And at the top, it reads, "Negro cocaine fiends are a new Southern menace." And also in a Salt Lake Tribune, a newspaper article from March 16th, 1913, the headline in bold letters says, "Evil Mexican plans that drive you insane." So there's this concerted effort to strike up this narrative that is used in these really violent ways, which we know is about the maintenance of power, of domination, of capital. I'm running a little on time, but I'm just going to read this. So, contemporary drug policy, criminalization, and mass incarceration. While the foundation of modern drug policy in the United States and its massive apparatus of enforcement and sustained racialized narratives and disproportionate consequences for communities of color began to germinate in the early 20th century, it is the President Nixon era that defines it. Nixon officially declared the war on drugs in June 1971, where drugs were, quote, public enemy number one. Nixon increased funding for existing drug policy enforcement agencies, though, unlike his most immediate successors, did significantly expand drug treatment efforts. So Nixon's iteration of the drug war wasn't as violent as it actually becomes in the subsequent administrations. There were some evidence-based, public health-centered approaches to responding to addiction and other issues in our communities. But the Nixon administration is responsible for the measures like mandatory sentencing and the no-knock warrant. Remember the warrant that led to Breonna Taylor's murder? We got to draw these connections. These policies used as an opening, as a vehicle to visit terror upon Black people, poor people, low-income people, working class people, and sort of like taps into the zeitgeist or to the sort of stream of consciousness that all of this is informing our understanding, our perspectives, and our imagination about why things are the way that they are in this country. And it cannot be divorced from drug policy and drug policy conversations and racism and classism. So the Nixon administration is responsible for that. And in the year prior to Nixon's announcement, the 1970 Controlled Substance Act, the CSA, was passed by Congress that established a federal policy to regulate the manufacturing, distribution, importing, exporting, and use of regulated substances. President Nixon, in efforts to consolidate controlled substance law enforcement, created the Drug Enforcement Agency, that's the DEA. In 1973, the CSA also created the Federal Drug Schedule, a classification system determining the degree of medicinal utility of controlled substances. While there are legitimate measures in Nixon's period of federal drug regulation, it is on record that Nixon's address of drug policy was not a purely law and order public health initiative. But it's really important to hear me, and this is the most important piece, and I'll stop reading from here. His counsel, Nixon's counsel, and assistant for domestic affairs, John Ehrlichman, is on record in a paper stating, quote, "You want to know what this was really about?" The drug war he's talking about. "The Nixon White House had two enemies, the anti-war left and Black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or Black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies, that's leftists, with marijuana, and Blacks, that's revolutionary Blacks, with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." Now, for my last 3 minutes for my opening here, I just want to say a couple of things about the contemporary drug crisis or drug policy crisis. You see what I'm saying? It's a very important paradigm shift in how we think about it. The drug toxic supply or the drug supply is rendered toxic by problematic drug policy because prohibition creates a context for all kinds of different behaviors and all kinds of phenomena that have disproportionate impact on the people that are most impacted in the first place by mass incarceration, et cetera. So in New York City, This is the data I'm about to tell you is from the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene's EPI data from 2023. Is that Black New Yorkers had the highest rate of overdose deaths and the largest absolute increase in rate from 2021 to 2022. That's one thing. Most people dying from preventable overdose in the city of New York are Black and have been since 2016, and it increases every year. But when you think about the OPCs, the overdose prevention centers operating in Manhattan, when people have opposition to them, remember the people that are in need of them the most. You cannot build a revolutionary movement. You cannot build a social movement with real power if all of the people are dead. We need overdose prevention centers. We need safer consumption spaces. We need syringe service programs. We need methadone clinics, period. Number two, adults aged 55 to 64 had the highest rate of overdose, followed by adults ages 45 to 54. What that means, Black older adults in our city, our elders, are dying from preventable overdose because of the legacies of these policies that I'm naming. Number three, residents of the Bronx had the highest rate of overdose deaths in 2022. There were 73.6 per 100,000 residents, and that was an increase from 2021, where 70.1 per 100,000 residents. And number four, my colleague Jasmine Vanilla often says this: if the South Bronx was its own state, it would rank second in the nation as the highest overdose deaths. So the drug war, the contemporary overdose crisis, is a racial justice issue. And it is incumbent upon us, who are leftists, who are revolutionary lovers of people, that we respond to that issue. And prohibition does not work. So I'm running out of my time, so I'm just gonna say two more things. I'm a social movements kind of guy. I think that we've got to be involved in organization, which is why I'm here, which is why I invited members from another organization that I work with. And because organizations are what are the vehicles to develop the leadership that help produce the social movements that transform the world around us. And that's what I'm interested in having a conversation about. That's why I love the Poor People's Campaign. And I love that we're having an internationalist conversation here. And also, as I dismount from here, I want to say that next week, Wednesday, on the 28th, I've been helping to organize a 24-hour vigil and reading of the names of the 30,000 plus Palestinians who have been killed in in Israel's siege on Gaza. So the idea is to call on all the city council members to call for a ceasefire and for us to read the names of all of the people that have been killed as we try to help move this city, at least, towards a different degree of consciousness to help end the violence that's happening to Palestinians right now by the state of Israel. Thank you.